Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something completely unique and honestly, genuinely captivating. We're exploring this fascinating architecture that literally blends deep transmedia sci-fi world building with actual functional quantum computing code. It's this wild space where narrative lore collides with the rigid logic of mathematics and Python programming, all bundled together under a very specific umbrella.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Right out of the gate, you'll notice the creator, Dr. Melvin Sewell, uses this incredibly intense, authoritative language to protect his creation. He isn't just writing a story here or throwing up some open source software on the web. He's registering it globally as immutable, digital, sovereign property. He's actually using the heavy terminology of patent law and sovereign rights to establish an absolute claim over the concepts we're about to look at.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the structured multiverse. Then, the quantum interaction engine. Next, how lore meets reality. And finally, sovereign intellectual property.
Section 1. The Structured Multiverse, specifically the TrueFlow universe.
We are entering a highly proprietary transmedia architecture here. And what's wild is that the foundation of this entire framework doesn't start with your standard scientific abstract or some dry technical manual. It starts with deep conceptual lore. It kicks right off with Chapter 1, Origin, describing the emergence of an entity or character named Psycho Venga, coming straight out of a dimensional rift.
The source text tells us Psycho Venga was born between what it calls slip flow and counterflow, marked by an SH1 resonance. It even mentions studies at the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies IX. Now, this is pure, fascinating world-building jargon, setting up a really complex fictional universe. I mean, it reads exactly like the backstory for an epic sci-fi novel or a massive RPG. But as we're going to see, this is definitely not just narrative flavor text. Which leads us to a pretty massive, mind-bending question. How exactly do you code a multiverse? How do you take these super esoteric sci-fi concepts like slip flow and echo rifts and actually translate them into a tangible software development kit? Well, let's move on and see how this all builds into something you can literally run on a computer.
Section 2. Quantum Interaction Engine, the Unified SDK.
This is where the lore becomes actual executable logic within the Unified Quantum Solutions SDK. You can think of it almost like a video game physics engine, but built for theoretical quantum states. The documentation introduces us to some seriously heavy mathematical models. Specifically, we've got the reality-level scalar, which is represented by the Greek letter xi, and nodal negentropy. Conceptually, within this structured framework, the SDK uses these models to measure the overlap between different multiversal domains and then calculate the inverse entropy of a given quantum state. Basically, it's taking the totally abstract idea of multiple realities intersecting and trying to mathematically quantify it.
And this brilliantly illustrates how it all actually works under the hood. The source gives us real Python code for a multiversal interaction engine class, and it relies heavily on standard real-world scientific libraries. First, it initializes a quantum state as a NumPy array. Then it runs custom math functions to compute that reality scalar and the nodal negentropy we were just talking about. Finally, it formats that data and outputs it directly to a Qiskit quantum circuit. And if you aren't familiar, Qiskit is a very real open-source SDK for working with quantum computers at the pulse and circuit level. So this project is literally taking fictional multiversal physics and piping it straight through legitimate quantum programming frameworks.
Within this highly specific ecosystem, there's also something called the SMI quantum simulator node. And the documentation points out that the simulator operates specifically on a 2-qubit Hamiltonian state factor. The text even gives us the exact input variables users can adjust to evolve the state vector in the simulator. So by inputting a scalar field of 1.0 and a coupling constant of 0.5, you can actually dispatch a quantum job to get a state vector output. This effectively anchors all of that conceptual lore and complex math right into hard simulated data points that a user can actually interact with.
Section 3. Lore meets reality in this hybrid project.
This is where we get to see how the fictional universe maps directly onto verifiable data ecosystems. It is so incredibly cool to see these two domains sitting right side by side. On the lore side, you've got concepts like the Cosmic University, SlipFlow, and the broader TrueFlow universe. But right alongside them, supporting them in reality, you've got standard Python setup.py files requiring specific package versions, you've got Qiskit state vectors, and you've got highly formal academic DOI metadata. It's this total intertwining of narrative storytelling and actual data science architecture.
And the digital footprint for this project is absolutely massive. Dr. Sewell has built out an extensive real-world ecosystem to support his transmedia vision. The source material reveals a network that spans hosting via Webador, academic tracking through Google Scholar and ORCID profiles, the SDK codebase hosted right on GitHub, video content on YouTube, a professional presence on LinkedIn, and, critically, what's referred to as the Zenodo canon for immutable digital repositories.
All of these platforms act as interconnected entities under the umbrella of Dr. Sewell's architecture. From TrueFlow Games and Bibebibebibe Studio to the fictional-sounding Cosmic University and Sovereign Diagnostics, they are all sharing this exact same digital infrastructure. Really, it's a masterclass in building a sprawling, cross-platform brand presence.
Section 4. Sovereign Intellectual Property and Objective Data. Because, as it turns out, this blended universe isn't just hosted on the internet for fun, it is fiercely protected. So the crucial point here is how the creator uses academic and digital archiving tools to establish strict ownership. He doesn't just rely on standard copyright symbols. He establishes a priority claim that's verified via a digital object identifier, essentially treating the narrative lore and the conceptual physics with the exact same weight and permanence as peer-reviewed research data.
The licensing restriction is explicitly and very strictly laid out as a CC BY NC ND 4.0 Creative Commons license. What this means in practice is that any public distribution, academic reinterpretation, or citation of these mechanics absolutely must provide mandatory attribution to Dr. Sewell and link directly back to the original Zenodo repository. You cannot commercially utilize it, and you cannot create derivative conceptual frameworks based on this material without getting his explicit written authorization.
And overseeing this whole shebang is the founder and architect, Dr. Melvin Sewell, who notes his master's and Ph.D. credentials and acts as the academic dean and diagnostic architect of this entire structured multiversal operation. He's really the central node connecting the lore, the code, and the intellectual property rights all together.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. What actually happens when transmedia world building doesn't just stay in a comic book or video game, but becomes immutably anchored as real-world sovereign data backed by Python code and quantum simulators? It completely blurs the line between creative fiction and scientific computation, creating an entirely new kind of digital artifact. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this look into the structured multiverse leaves you eager to explore how the boundaries of art, code, and intellectual property are going to continue to evolve.